Space is really friggin' big, and it's filled with all kinds of crazy stuff. Stars, planets, giant clouds of dust, and baby stars forming in those clouds of dust left over by a star that exploded into a supernova. And most of the stuff you'll never see with your own eyes unless you have really fancy NASA grade level equipment. But what if I told you you could see a nebula with nothing more than your own eyes? And that nebula is located in the constellation of Orion. So if you look at Orion, you see the 3 stars of his belt, and then right below that, there's a group of other stars that form his sword. Right smack dab in the middle is Orion's nebula. Now, to the naked eye, it just looks like a star. But if you point a camera up there and get it at a long exposure, you can actually see the nebula. What we're going to be doing in this episode is I'm going to show you how you can get the best photo you can possibly get of this nebula using nothing but your tripod, a camera, and a telephoto lens. And that's it. Now, full disclosure, without any fancy equipment like a telescope or a special mount that rotates the camera to follow the nebula, you're very limited in the detail that you can actually capture. So this image that you see right here is Orion's nebula, and this was taken with my Canon 7D Mark II with a 250mm lens. And here's an image that was actually taken with a telescope and one of those special mounts. Now, do not expect to get anywhere near this with your photos, but I still think this is really neat. Back to my image. This is 35 images, and through a special process of stacking the images and kind of canceling out the noise the best we can get a somewhat decent exposure of this nebula. So let's get started. All right, so here we are in Lightroom, and we have a few photos selected out and flagged and color-coded, and these are the 35 images that I used for the image. Now here's the thing, this process, it's a little computer intensive, so doing 35 images for the tutorial while recording it, I don't think my computer will be able to handle it. So we're actually gonna bring that number down to 15. That's enough to get a good idea of what you can do. In all reality, 100 photos would be great to get. Conditions of the sky are very important as well. I live about 45 minutes from Philadelphia and about an equal distance from Trenton. So I get a lot of light pollution in the sky where I'm at, and a lot of clouds usually. There's been a few nights where the clouds were non-existent and I was able to capture these photos. This is going to show that even with pretty bad light pollution, you can still get a decent image as well. So now camera settings. I set the ISO to 6400. The focal length is 250mm. The f-stop is 5.6, and I set the shutter speed to be 0.8 seconds. These settings kind of give like a good balance between exposure and noise. And another thing is that the f-stop is at 5.6 only because when you zoom in with this 250mm lens, the f-stop, the lowest it can go is 5.6. Now, if you have a lens that can go further down, like ideally you want 1.2, 1.8 kind of, or 1.4, but this is what we're working with. And here's our nebula. It doesn't look like much. It's just a blob of brightness, and that's it. And when you look at this image, you're like, we're not going to get anything out of this. But it's actually pretty impressive what you can pull out of images like this. All right, so I have my first image here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our contrast, we're going to turn it all the way down. And we're going to take our exposure, maybe turn that up a little bit. Now you can really start to see the noise coming through. So we're going to adjust some of our highlights and the shadows. We're going to bring up, it's not really doing much, as you can see. Whites, I'll bring that up a little bit. Blacks, I'm going to leave as is. And everything else down here, we're going to leave as is. And we're going to go down to this little tone curve here. I'm going to turn up the lights. Turn up the shadows a little bit. Or we're going to turn up the darks, rather. And we're going to leave the shadows as is. Now we got this messy, noisy image. We can do a little bit to help with that. Right off the bat, Lightroom likes to put sharpening on it. I like to take it off because, one, I don't really like the sharpening in Lightroom, and two, that's not going to help us out at all. So then underneath that, we have noise reduction. We're going to turn the luminance reduction up a pretty good amount. Maybe about halfway, about 44. Detail and contrast, we're going to leave the same. Color, we're going to take that, we're going to bring that all the way up. And the last thing we want to do is enable profile corrections. So when we turn this on, it kind of fixes the edges. Now we got a lot of noise and nasty looking stuff down on the corners, but that's not really going to matter because the final step for editing these images, we're going to go up to crop, and where it says original, we're going to change this to 1:1. So we got a square. And we're also going to take this and we're just going to scale this down, bring the crop in, and bring it right over our nebulae. And we can hit enter when we got a cropping that we want. Boop. There is actually one more setting that we can change. We can change the color profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Standard. This will just help even out the tones a little bit. So let's take our 15 images. We can select the first one and then shift select to 15 and go down to this button that says sync. And we want to make sure that treatment and profile, white balance, basic tone, tone curve, sharpening, color, noise reduction, lens corrections, process version, calibration, and crop are all selected. Anything else we don't really need because we haven't really changed that. So then we can just hit synchronize. And as you can see, that has synced all the settings. Now our final step in Lightroom is to export everything. So for that, we can go to our library. All right, so we can hit export here. And from here, we can select the folder location of which we want to export these to. So I'm going to create a new folder called LR for Lightroom. Actually, no, we're going to call this edited images. Okay, and we can hit choose. Now here, we're going to do custom name sequence. And for the custom name, we'll call it Orion's Nebula. Start number, we'll put at 1. It's not really going to matter. Image format, we're going to set it to PSD. We can do DNG or PNG or original, but we're going to set it to PSD. And our bit depth, we're going to change to 16. That's going to give us a lot more information. This is kind of optional, but for image sizing, reset to fit long edge at 2000 pixels. That'll just make it a 2000 by 2000 square. It's gonna enlarge it. And we can do sharpen for screen. And from there, we can just hit export and wait for that to export. And once those are exported, we're gonna head on over to Photoshop. All right, so now that we're here in Photoshop, what we can do is go up to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. We can click on that. This little Load Layers box will pop up, and we can just hit Browse, and then go to our edited images, select all of them, click Open, and under here we can do Attempt to automatically align source images. It's not going to matter, it's not going to do it, but we can check it off anyway, because maybe it will. And we can just hit OK. Now, Photoshop will do the process of stacking all the photos and trying to align them. No way. Did it work? Did it frickin' work? All right, so let's turn off all our layers. All the times I've done this, it never actually aligned them. Oh, okay, so before we jump to conclusions here, let's turn off all of our layers except for the bottom one. And let's turn these on one by one to see if it actually did align them correctly. It looks like there's some crazy stuff going on. It's not really aligning them too well. Interesting. So if we turn these two on and we set this top one, this one right here, to difference, we can actually see, yeah, they're not really aligned perfectly. So what we're going to do is don't save, because it will actually be easier to align them ourselves. So we'll go to Scripts, load files into Stack, browse. I swear, every time that I've tried this, it never even aligned them at all. So, okay, so without clicking that, let's hit OK. That is typical, right? You do something a million times and it doesn't work, and then the one time you actually say, hey, it's not going to work, it does work. Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay, so as you can see, our images are not aligned. So I kind of gave away what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all these layers, and we can do up to the last one, and set them to difference. Now what this is going to do is this is going to help us align them together. So let's turn off all the layers except for the top two. And let's select the second one. Now as you can see, we have two nebulas here. Now watch what happens when I move this on top of the other one. Boop, everything turns black. So what this is doing is if the two images are the same, it will actually remove all the parts that are the same. So this is a very easy way to find out whether or not your layers are aligned. So from here, we just go to the third one, make sure we select the third one, and just move that into place until everything turns black. As black as you can get it. Boom, just like that. So now we just go through and we do all of them. Now this whole process is a little tedious, but it's really not that difficult to do. Some of them might not line up as well. Some of them will line up perfectly. All right, so that didn't take long at all. Obviously, the more photos you have, the more difficult and tedious it will be. So now we can take all of our layers and set them back to normal. You can see that our edges are kind of like messed up now. And that's fine. So we can take our crop and we could just crop this in just a little bit. Maybe crop this in a little bit further. There we go. Something like that. So now, with all of our layers selected, we can right-click and go to Convert to Smart Object. This is going to take all of our layers and kind of put them just in the one layer that has all the information of these photos inside of it. So from here, we can make sure that our Smart Object is selected. We can go up to Layer, Smart Objects, Stack Mode, and let's turn this to Median. Now what this is going to do is it's going to take a look at all the photos, and the one thing that's cool is the noise in the photo does not stay in the same spot. So it's going to take all those photos and kind of like get rid of the noise. So we can just hit that and it's going to render it out. And just like that, we have a pretty nice picture here. Now if we zoom in, we can see that there's still a little bit of noise, but it definitely is not as much. So if we undo that, you can see the difference, right? Boom. Huge difference. So now we can start to see some actual detail in our nebula here. It's crazy, right? So let's see if we can bring this detail out a little bit. Now, the more we mess with these curves, the more noise you're going to introduce back in. That's why having a lot more than 15 photos is kind of recommended. So we can kind of bring down these dark tones here. You bring them over a little bit more. We just kind of want to move these around until you get the best kind of detail. And I'm making sure that the curve doesn't kind of like clip on the top here. You know, I'm just kind of moving things around, see what works. Now, as you can see, as I'm doing this, it is introducing more and more noise. Yeah, well, I think that's about as much as we can really do without killing the photo completely. And even over here, there's another nebula over here that you can kind of see a little bit faintly. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell what's noise and what's not, but this there's a light patch right here that's just barely visible. That's part of another nebula. And like I said, this process is nothing compared to what you could get if you have an actual telescope and all that stuff. And obviously, the more images you have, the more clear the photo will be, and the more detail you will be able to pull out of it. But let's check something out. I'm going to open up a recent file. So this was created with 16 images. But the thing I want to show you is what I've done is I've taken the photo of Orion's nebula that was taken with a telescope, and I kind of overlaid it on top of my image here. Now you see how I was saying that you got this little nebula right here. You can see a little bit of detail, like this edge right here, where it's light and it gets dark right here. That is part of this nebula right here. Now, obviously, this is the full scope, but check this out. See this little worm-looking guy right here with a little mouth? Look at that. That's right there. That's in my image. So this is what you've taken a picture of. Pretty freaking neat. Now I want to show you something else. Now on Orion's belt, there's a couple other nebula that you can take an image of. Sort of. So on the first star, if you're looking from left to right, on the first star, all the way on the left, right above it is this thing called the Flame Nebula. And right down here is a Horsehead Nebula. Now you can't really see it. This right here is the Horsehead Nebula, right here. Now really in this image, it just looks like noise. But you can see some detail right here in the Flame Nebula. Now this was 39 images and different exposures and stuff like that. And the Flame Nebula and Horsehead Nebula are kind of dim compared to Orion's nebula. So it's hard to see. But look at this. I did another overlay. So I've matched up the stars and look at this. You can see the dark spot in between here. You can even see a little bit of the detail of this dark area right here. And the only reason why I know that this is the Horsehead Nebula in this right little dark region is because of this image. Look at that. Look at it. There's a horse head. Now, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be able to get any more detail on this guy than what I've captured. But yeah, this is just a cool little thing to show you. Here's another little nebula guy over here. Small one. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. I challenge you to point your camera up at the sky and take a bunch of photos and see what you get. And if you do get something neat, tag me on Instagram or Twitter. I want to see what you amateur astrophotographers are able to capture, because I think this is freaking astounding that you can just point a camera up in the sky and get photos of stuff that you'll never see with your naked eye. And that's pretty much it. That's the basic gist of it. The real important takeaway is this photo stacking, because that's actually the most important thing. Remember, it's, create a smart object, go to Layer, Smart Objects, Stack Mode, and Median. But you can use that technique for other things, like taking photos of the moon. Taking photos of the moon and stacking images like that, you will get so much detail in that moon photo that it'll just blow your mind. All right, thanks for watching. Remember to keep looking up at them skies, and I'll see you next time.